You've been waiting for an answer that already came. Right now, maybe you're lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same situation over and over. The job you didn't get, the relationship that fell apart, the door that closed right in your face, the prayer you've been praying for months, maybe even years, that still feels unanswered. And somewhere deep inside, you're starting to wonder, does God even hear me? If that's where you are right now, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you might completely change the way you see your life. There's a verse in the Bible, Romans 8 verse 28, and if you've grown up in church, you've probably heard it 100 times. Maybe it's been stitched on a pillow. Maybe someone said it to you at the worst possible moment and it felt hollow. But I want you to hear it differently today. Not as a cliche, as a truth that is quietly operating in your life, right now, whether you recognize it or not. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Notice it doesn't say some things. It doesn't say the comfortable things, or the things that make sense, or the things you planned. It says all things. Every single thing, including the one you're currently devastated about. Here's what most people miss about prayer. We treat it like placing an order. We tell God what we want, we give Him a deadline, and then we wait for the exact delivery we requested. And when it doesn't show up the way we expected, we assume the prayer failed. We assume God said no. Or worse, we assume God wasn't listening at all. But what if God answered your prayer, just not in the language you were expecting? Think about this. You prayed for a specific person to come back into your life, and instead, they stayed gone. You called that a closed door. You called it silence. But what if that was God saying, not that one? Not because you don't deserve love, but because something better, something deeper, something more aligned with who you're actually becoming is still on its way? What if the unanswered prayer was the answered prayer? We live in a culture obsessed with speed. Next day delivery. Instant results. We want the promotion now. We want the healing now. We want the breakthrough now. And when life moves slower than our expectations, we start to spiral. We overthink every decision we've ever made. We scroll through social media watching everyone else's highlight reel and wondering what we did wrong. The anxiety creeps in. The self-doubt gets loud. And we forget, completely forget, that there is a God who exists outside of time, who sees the full picture when we can only see the frame. Let me give you a real example. Maybe you've lived something like this. You prayed hard for that job. You told everyone about it. You were certain it was yours. You had the interview. You prepared. And then you got the email, "We went with another candidate." And you were crushed. You felt embarrassed. You felt overlooked. Maybe even forgotten by God. But 6 months later, that company laid off half their staff. Or you got an even better opportunity that you never would have found if you'd taken that first job. Or you finally had the space to discover something about yourself. A gift, a calling, a direction that you never would have explored if you'd gotten what you asked for. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's Romans 8 verse 28 working in real time. But here's the hard part. In the middle of it, while you're in the waiting room, it doesn't feel like a plan. It feels like pain. And that's the part nobody talks about. The in-between. The space between the prayer and the answer is where most people lose their faith. Because it's quiet. Because nothing seems to be moving. Because you're doing everything right and still nothing is changing. And the enemy of your soul, the voice of fear and doubt, loves that space. It whispers, "You're too late. You made too many mistakes. You're not the kind of person God does things for." And if you've ever believed that lie, even for a second, this message is for you. Because here's what the Bible actually says about that waiting space. Romans 8 doesn't just give us verse 28 in isolation. A few verses earlier, in verse 26, it says, "The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans." Wordless groans. That means there are moments in your life when you don't even have the words. When you're so broken, so exhausted, so overwhelmed that you can't form a coherent prayer. And God doesn't just hear you anyway. He sends His Spirit to pray on your behalf, to intercede for you when you can't intercede for yourself. You are never too far gone. You are never too quiet for God to hear. Now here's the part one really want you to sit with, because this is where it gets personal. Romans 8 verse 28 says God works all things for the good of those called according to His purpose. And that word, purpose, is the key that unlocks everything. Because God isn't just trying to make your life comfortable. He's trying to make you complete. He's not just answering your prayer. He's shaping your character. He's not just opening doors. He's preparing you for what's behind them. Sometimes the delay is the answer. Sometimes the detour is the direction. Sometimes the thing you thought was the end was actually just the beginning of something you couldn't have imagined. Think about Joseph in the Bible. This is a man who was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He went to prison for something he didn't do. He was forgotten, abandoned, for years. And the entire time, I can only imagine the prayers he was praying. God, why? God, where are you? God, when does this end? And then one day, he was lifted from a prison cell to the second highest position in Egypt. He saved thousands of lives, including the very brothers who betrayed him. And he said something so powerful it should stop you in your tracks. He said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." That's not a fairy tale. That's a pattern, a divine pattern. And it's been playing out in human lives for thousands of years, including yours. So let me ask you something honestly. What if the thing you've been calling your biggest failure is actually your setup? What if the season you've been calling your worst is actually your most important? What if every hard thing, the loss, the rejection, the closed door, the long wait, has been quietly working together to bring you to exactly where you need to be? Now I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds good as a concept, but my situation is different. My pain is real. My problem isn't just spiritual. It's financial, it's relational, it's physical. My anxiety isn't something I can just pray away. And I hear you. God hears you too. Faith was never meant to be a way of denying the reality of your pain. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, even knowing he was about to raise him from the dead. He wept because pain is real, grief is real, struggle is real, but so is Romans 8 verse 28. So is the truth that you were not created to carry this alone. You were not created to white-knuckle your way through life, grinding until you collapse, performing for everyone around you, pretending you have it all together. You were created for something deeper, something quieter, a faith that doesn't panic when things fall apart, because it knows that the one who holds the universe also holds your situation. Here's the wake-up call. Here's the part one really need you to hear before this ends. Jesus already answered your prayer. The answer just looked different than you expected. And because it didn't come in the package you were looking for, you labeled it as silence. You labeled it as no. But God's no is always a redirection. His delays are always preparation. His closed doors are always protection. The question isn't whether God is working. Romans 8 verse 28 settles that. The question is, will you trust him enough to keep going while you wait to understand it? Because trust isn't trust if it only shows up when everything makes sense. Real faith is choosing to believe in the goodness of God in the middle of the story before you can see the ending. It's saying, God, I don't understand this, but I believe you're in it. I believe you see what I can't see. I believe this pain has a purpose I haven't discovered yet. That kind of faith doesn't make the pain disappear, but it changes the meaning of the pain. And when you change the meaning, you change your whole experience of the journey. So today, I want to give you something practical. Not just spiritual encouragement, but something you can actually do. Look back. Before you look forward, look back. Think about the hardest season of your life before this one. Think about the thing you prayed for that didn't happen the way you wanted. And then trace the line. Where did it lead? What did it teach you? Who did you become because of it? I promise you, if you're honest, you'll find the fingerprints of God in places you used to call abandoned. Then do this. Stop praying for the outcome and start praying for the trust. Instead of God, give me this. Pray, God, help me trust you through this. That shift alone can change everything, because it moves you from desperation to surrender. And surrender, as terrifying as it sounds, is actually the most powerful spiritual position you can stand in. And finally, stop waiting to feel peace before you act in faith. Peace doesn't usually come before the step. It comes because of the step. The moment you stop trying to control every outcome and release it back to God, something shifts. Not always the circumstances, but you. And sometimes that's exactly what needed to change. You didn't stumble across this video by accident. The algorithm doesn't deserve that much credit. Jesus already answered your prayer. He answered it with something better than what you asked for. He answered it with growth you didn't know you needed. He answered it with protection from paths that would have hurt you. He answered it with the very thing that's going to make your story matter. You just have to trust Him long enough to see it. Maybe this message found you for a reason.